He ruined my life with a single photograph. And I fell in love with him right after. I never planned to be anyone's muse, especially not for a man whose every shot could make the world stop breathing. But there I was, standing awkwardly in front of his lens, trying not to look like a high school English teacher who still packed lunch from home. His name was Adrian Cole, 32, brilliant, and annoyingly confident. The kind of man who turned every street corner into art. He'd flown in from New York for a photography project on Ordinary Americans. Whatever that meant. I didn't expect ordinary to include me, a small-town teacher from Santa Monica with a closet full of corduroy blazers and a life that hadn't moved in years. But when he showed up at my classroom door that afternoon, the sun painting his hair gold, and said, "You're exactly what I've been looking for," something in me cracked open. "Mr. Turner, your presence is requested in the art department," my principal had said, half amused. I thought maybe one of my students had submitted another drawing of me as Shakespeare with a coffee addiction. But no, it was him, leaning casually against the wall, camera strap wrapped around his hand like it belonged there. "You're the English teacher, right?" Adrian asked, eyes tracing me with quiet curiosity. "You have a face that holds stories." I blinked. "I teach grammar." He grinned. "That's a story in itself." At first, I thought it was a joke that he wanted to photograph ordinary faces, people who blended into the background. I didn't think he saw anything worth capturing in mine. But then came the way his lens lingered, how he asked me to stand by the window, to just exist. His voice dropped low when he spoke, every word careful, deliberate. "You don't have to pose, Daniel. Just breathe." And God help me, I did. For weeks he came by the school. He photographed me teaching, reading alone in the library, grading essays in the break room. It should have felt intrusive, but instead I felt seen. He'd show me the photos later, moments I didn't even remember. My hand mid-gesture, the tired smile after a student's joke, the light hitting my glasses just right. "This one," he'd say, pointing to an image where I looked half lost, half alive. "This is what honesty looks like." No one had ever said something like that to me before. Adrian started joining me for lunch in the teacher's lounge, a place where the air smelled of old coffee and mild despair. The other teachers whispered, curious, but no one asked questions. He'd tell me stories about New York, his studio, the models, the loneliness behind the beauty. "I photograph everything I can't keep," he once said, looking out the window. "That's the curse of my work. I see too much, but I hold nothing." I didn't know how to reply, so I just said, "Maybe you just haven't found what's worth keeping." He smiled at that, but it was the kind of smile that hid too much. One rainy Friday, he asked me to meet him by the pier for the final shot. I went, foolishly nervous, wearing the same gray coat I always did. He stood there, drenched, camera hanging from his neck, eyes brighter than the storm around us. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. "The project's done." I tried to smile. "Then I guess this is goodbye." He hesitated, then raised the camera, pointing it at me one last time. "Look at me, Daniel," he whispered. "Not at the camera, at me." I did, and when the shutter clicked, I felt something break quietly, like a wave folding into itself. He lowered the camera. "You have no idea what you've done to me." "Adrian," he stepped closer, voice trembling. "I came here looking for faces. I found a reason." The rain fell harder, and before I could think, he kissed me. It wasn't perfect, desperate, soaked, and trembling, but it was real. The kind of kiss that says I shouldn't, but I can't not. When he pulled away, his breath caught. "You'll hate me for this later." "Why?" "Because I can't stay." He left the next morning. For weeks, the world went quiet. The school halls, the ocean breeze, even the sound of my students' chatter, everything felt thinner without him in it. I told myself it was just a moment, a spark that wasn't meant to last. Then his photo exhibition opened in New York. I didn't plan to see it, but curiosity or longing got the better of me. I found myself standing in a crowded gallery under blinding lights, surrounded by strangers murmuring words like raw, haunting, honest, and there, in the center, was me. The photo he'd taken on the pier, my face tilted slightly, rain streaking across my cheek, eyes filled with something between sorrow and surrender. The caption read, "The man who looked back." I wanted to hate him for it, for exposing me, for turning something so private into art. But then I saw the next frame, a close-up of Adrian himself. Eyes red, lips parted as if he'd just said goodbye. Beneath it, the caption read, "The one I should have stayed for." I didn't realize I was crying until a woman beside me offered a napkin. When I looked up again, Adrian was standing across the room. No camera, no mask, just him. The crowd faded, the lights dimmed, and all I could see was the man who once told me I had a face full of stories now looking like he wanted to rewrite his own. "Daniel," he said softly, stepping closer, "I never stopped thinking about you." I let out a shaky laugh. "You made me famous against my will." He smiled faintly. "You made me human against mine." The words hit harder than I expected. We walked out of the gallery together that night, the New York air sharp and alive around us. He took my hand quietly, like he was afraid it would vanish if he gripped too tight. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "but I want to try. With you." I looked at him, the man who saw me when I couldn't even see myself, and thought, maybe this time ordinary is enough. The city lights shimmered on his face, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a background character in someone else's story. I felt chosen. Adrian stayed in New York. I stayed in Santa Monica. At first, we called every night. His voice filled the quiet of my small apartment like music, soft, tired, familiar. He'd tell me about clients, galleries, the chaos of city life. I'd tell him about my students, the coffee that always tasted burnt, the sea breeze that reminded me of him. But slowly, life seeped in. His calls came later, the pauses between our words grew longer, and sometimes the connection itself, both the phone line and whatever bound us, just dropped. Until one day he said it outright. "Daniel, I think I need to figure out who I am again." The line went quiet after that, and all I could hear was the ocean outside my window, as if mocking the silence between us. 3 months passed. The students noticed before I did. I was grading essays one afternoon when Emma, a sophomore with a sharp tongue, frowned and said, "You stopped smiling, Mr. Turner." "I smile plenty," I lied. She looked unconvinced. "Not the real kind." That night, I went home and looked through my phone. Hundreds of photos, his, mine, ours. Adrian had this habit of taking pictures of the smallest things. The steam from my coffee, my hand mid-grading, the worn pages of my favorite book. Every picture felt like a fragment of a world that no longer existed. And then, as if the universe were listening, I got a message. "Adrian Cole, I'm coming back to California. I got a commission. We should talk." Talk. A word that could mean everything or nothing at all. He arrived 2 weeks later. I saw him first from across the faculty parking lot, standing beside his rental car, camera bag slung over his shoulder. His hair was longer now, the city still clinging to him in the way he stood, confident, yet somehow tired. When he saw me, his mouth twitched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, stranger." "Hey, photographer." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward, and he did too, until we stood close enough to feel each other's breath, but not close enough to fall apart. "I didn't think you'd actually come," I said quietly. "I didn't think I'd have to miss you this much," he replied. And just like that, the walls I'd built began to tremble again. He stayed at a hotel near the beach. I tried to keep my distance, to convince myself we were just two old friends catching up. But Adrian never did well with distance. He'd show up after classes, waiting by the gates with that camera of his. "Coffee?" he'd ask. "Don't you have a schedule?" I'd counter. "Only if you say no." And I never did. One afternoon, we sat on the boardwalk watching the sunset. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked suddenly. He glanced at me, confused. "Regret what?" "The photos, the exhibition, us." He exhaled slowly. "Every day. And not at all. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the horizon. "Daniel, when I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. You had your life, your job, everything steady. I didn't want to be the reason it all collapsed. You mean you didn't want to deal with what it meant to love me? His head snapped toward me. That's not fair. No, it's not. But it's true. The words hung between us, heavy and unkind. I could see the storm in his eyes, the guilt, the pain, the same fear I'd carried for months. Finally, he said, "You think I didn't fight myself every damn day? You think I didn't want to stay? Then why didn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The waves crashed behind us, cold wind cutting between our silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice cracked, unsure, almost begging. I thought of the photographs again, of how he saw me. Maybe I realized he hadn't left because he didn't love me. Maybe he left because he loved me too much to drag me into his world of scrutiny and chaos. But that didn't make it hurt any less. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Adrian, meet me at the pier tomorrow. One last photo." I didn't reply, but I went. The pier was empty, bathed in early morning fog. Adrian stood there, camera hanging loosely from his hand, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen him. When I reached him, he didn't speak. He just raised the camera. "Do you remember the last time we stood here?" he asked. "How could I forget?" He smiled sadly. "This time, I'm not leaving after." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He lowered the camera. "I turned down the New York commission. I want to stay here, start something new. Maybe teach photography at the community center. Maybe just breathe for once." I stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or relieved. "You gave up your career for this?" "For you," he said simply. Something inside me cracked, anger, love, fear, all tangled together. "You can't just come back and expect everything to be okay," I said, my voice shaking. "You left me. You turned my life into a gallery piece and vanished." "I know, and I'll never be able to undo that." He took a hesitant step forward. "But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness." It would have been easier to walk away, to protect what little I had left of my quiet, predictable life. But looking at him, at the man who'd somehow taught me to feel again, I realized I didn't want easy. I wanted real. I stepped closer, close enough that our breath mixed in the morning mist. "Do you still have the photo?" I asked. He nodded. "Every version of it." "Then you already know my answer." He blinked. "I do." I smiled faintly. I never stopped looking back. And this time, when he kissed me, it wasn't desperate. It was steady, grounded, and full of everything we hadn't said. Word of our relationship spread fast. Small towns were merciless that way. At school, whispers followed me through the halls. Some teachers avoided my eyes. Others offered quiet support. The principal called me in one afternoon, voice careful, as if tiptoeing through glass. "Mr. Turner, you're an excellent teacher," he began. "But the recent attention, it's complicated." "Because I fell in love?" I asked. "Because you fell in love with him." There it was, the unspoken truth wrapped in polite disapproval. He sighed. "I'm not firing you, Daniel, but maybe take a leave. Let things cool down." I nodded numbly. "Right, cool down." I told Adrian that evening. He looked at me like I'd been punched. "I'll talk to them," he said immediately. "I'll fix this." "No, Adrian." I shook my head. "This isn't something you can fix with words. People need time." He clenched his jaw. "So what? You just disappear." "I'm not disappearing. I'm breathing. Like you said." The silence stretched, heavy and aching. Finally, he said, "Then let me breathe with you." We packed up and drove north along the coast. No plans, no destination, just miles of road and an old camera on the dashboard. He took photos as we went, me laughing in the passenger seat, the ocean flashing beside us, our hands brushing on the gearshift. For once, it wasn't art. It was just life. We stayed in small motels, ate diner food, listened to the radio. Some nights we talked until dawn. Others we just sat quietly, his head resting on my shoulder. Somewhere near Big Sur, we stopped by a cliff overlooking the sea. The air smelled like salt and pine. Adrian set the camera on the hood of the car, timer blinking. "One photo," he said. "For us." I rolled my eyes. "Another one? This one's different." He pulled me close as the timer beeped. "Because this one's not about what we lost." The shutter clicked. "It's about what we found." That photo never made it to any gallery. It never needed to. It stayed on our fridge, faded, slightly crooked, a little sun-bleached. But every time I saw it, I remembered. Love doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. Months later, I returned to teaching. The whispers had quieted, replaced by something gentler: understanding, maybe even respect. Adrian started teaching photography at the community center, mentoring kids who'd never had a voice before. Sometimes I'd visit his classes, pretending to just check in, but mostly just to watch him work. He had this light about him, this way of seeing beauty in everything. One afternoon, he caught me watching and grinned. "You're staring." "I'm learning," I said. He raised a brow. "Learning what?" "How to see the world the way you do." He chuckled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That's easy. You start by falling in love with it." And maybe that was it. Maybe that's what he'd taught me all along. To fall in love with imperfection, with risk, with the wild, unpredictable mess of being alive. I thought someone like me would never be chosen. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe love doesn't choose the remarkable. Maybe it chooses the real. And standing there, sunlight catching his hair, laughter spilling between us, I finally understood he didn't ruin my life with a photograph. He saved it. 5 years later, the photo on the fridge was still there, faded now, corners curling, but somehow even more beautiful because of it. Our little home by the coast had grown around it. Adrian's studio filled the converted garage, all sunlight and the smell of paint and film chemicals. My classroom remained the same, chalk dust and laughter. Our lives, once miles apart, had folded together into something steady, something honest. Sometimes I caught myself watching him through the kitchen window as he worked outside barefoot in the grass, camera hanging around his neck, sunlight caught in his hair. He'd turn, notice me watching, and grin like he always did. "Still staring, teacher?" he'd tease. "Still learning," I'd reply. That was our language, now gentle teasing wrapped around quiet devotion. But love, real love, doesn't stay untouched. One evening, as the sky turned lavender over the ocean, Adrian came home late, exhaustion in his shoulders. He dropped his bag, sighed, and sat by the door. "Rough day?" I asked. He nodded, rubbing his temples. "The community center might lose funding. They're saying we don't bring in enough attendance." I joined him on the floor. "You've built that place from nothing. They can't just shut it down." "They can," he said bitterly. "And they might." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the waves kept coming and going, unbothered by our small world falling apart. Then I said quietly, "Let's fight it. Together." He looked at me, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. "You'd do that?" "Of course. You fought for me when no one else would." That night, we sat up until morning writing proposals, calling contacts, planning an exhibition to raise awareness. I typed until my fingers cramped, Adrian pacing back and forth, muttering ideas to himself. It was chaos. It was beautiful. The exhibition was held in a converted library downtown. Adrian called it Faces of Tomorrow. Every photo was of someone from the community center: kids, elders, people society liked to forget. When I walked through the hall that night, I felt the same thing I had years ago in New York, that stillness that only true art creates. But this time, the story wasn't about him or me. It was about everyone who needed to be seen. Near the end of the gallery, I found one photo that wasn't listed in the program. It was us. Not the dramatic peer shot from before. Not a posed embrace or sunset silhouette, just the two of us sitting at our kitchen table. Papers everywhere. Coffee cups half full, exhausted and smiling. The caption read, "Ordinary Love." Adrian came up behind me, slipping his arm around my waist. "I wanted people to see what love actually looks like," he said softly. "Messy?" I asked, smiling. "Real," he whispered. "Always real." The exhibition was a success. Donations flooded in. The center survived. That night, as we drove home, headlights tracing silver lines on the highway, Adrian reached for my hand. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. "Every day," I said. He laughed quietly. "Sometimes I still think I don't deserve this." I squeezed his hand. "Then we'll just keep proving that you do." He looked at me, eyes shining in the dark. "God, you're still the same." "No," I said. "I finally became who you saw in me." Years passed in a gentle rhythm. Summers blurred into autumns. Birthdays turned into quiet dinners and candlelight. The smell of coffee filled our mornings like a promise. Adrian grew a little older, a little grayer at the temples. I did too. But there was peace in the kind that comes only after storms. Sometimes former students would visit. They'd see the framed photographs on the wall and smile knowingly. "Is that you, Mr. Turner?" they'd ask, pointing to the old peer photo. I'd nod. "Once upon a time," they'd grin. "You look happy." And I was. One evening, near our 10th anniversary, Adrian handed me a small, worn box. "Before you open it," he said, "promise you won't laugh. Depends on what's inside." He smirked. "Just open it." Inside was a camera, old, dented, clearly well-loved. My camera. The one he'd used for that first photograph all those years ago. "I thought you sold this," I whispered. "I kept it," he said, "because it started everything. And now, I want you to use it." I blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You've been behind the story all along. Maybe it's time you saw it through your own lens." So I did. That weekend, I took my first photograph of Adrian sitting on the porch, sunlight painting his profile gold. No drama, no pretense. Just him existing. When I showed him, he smiled softly. "You've got the eye for it." I grinned. "Guess I learned from the best." He leaned in, kissing me on the forehead. "No," he murmured. "You just learned to see love." One morning years later, after he'd gone out for a walk, I stood by the window and watched the tide roll in. The world felt slower now, gentler. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were ours. And as I turned, my eyes caught that old photo again, the one from the pier. The rain, the heartbreak, the hope. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt like the beginning of something that had never really ended. I thought about who I used to be. A man hiding behind his routines, teaching words he didn't dare speak aloud. And I thought of who I'd become. Someone who had learned that love wasn't a sin, or a scandal, or a secret. It was a language. One we'd built word by word, kiss by kiss, photograph by photograph. Adrian returned then, cheeks flushed from the wind. He saw me standing there and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Us," I said simply. He walked up, slid his arms around me, and rested his head on my shoulder. "Still happy?" I turned, kissed him softly. "Still chosen." That night, before bed, I placed the old camera back on the shelf. Its lens caught the light for a moment, faint, fleeting, like memory itself. Maybe someday when we're gone, someone will find it. Maybe they'll scroll through our photos and see the story of two men who dared to exist for each other. Maybe they'll see that love, quiet, stubborn, and imperfect, is still the most beautiful kind of rebellion. As I turned off the light, Adrian murmured half asleep beside me, "Hey, teacher." "Yeah." He smiled without opening his eyes. "You know that photo on the fridge? The one that's practically yellow now?" "Yeah." "Don't ever take it down." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, brushing his hair from his forehead. "It's where we began." Outside, the waves kept whispering, endless and patient. Inside, his hand found mine beneath the sheets, warm and familiar. And somewhere between the sound of the ocean and his heartbeat, I realized I'd spent years teaching others how to find meaning in words. But the truest story I'd ever known was the one we never had to write. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.